Well, hi everybody. It's Rusty here again, and today I'm going to be talking about my favorite part of the whole backpacking experience, and that is camping. So today it's camp routine. So there's a lot of topics to cover. When you talk about camping, there's deciding when and where to camp. Are you going to use your shelter, a shelter that's at the campsite, or are you going to use your tent or hammock if that's what you prefer? Um, Once you've made a decision, there's the whole setting up process. There's what you're going to do for and with your clothing, cooking and water situation, and of course, what you're at camp for primarily is to sleep. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Um, so when and where to camp? Well, there's some critical information you really have to have. One is knowing where the next campsite is from where you are at any particular time. How far is it, and what time of day is it right now? As you know, I had this rule that a couple hours before sunset, I'm going to start looking for a good place to stop. Since I should know where at least the organized campgrounds are, I'll know whether they're within reach or not. If it seems like it's going to be a little bit of a stretch to get to one, I might look for a stealth site. If you've got Far Out, I guess is the new name for Gut Hook, or one of the other hiking information services on your phone, you can probably know even where there's good stealth sites along the way. What I look for in a stealth site, of course, probably the main thing that I'm looking for is water, because it's not going to have any of the other facilities. A stealth site, as long as it's got a good flat place to put your tent and it's got a good water supply, then to me that's a good stealth site. The next concern is, well, if you are going to an organized campground, what facilities does it have? Most have a privy. I just find that's really convenient, better than digging a hole and having to also carry out toilet paper. Does it have a shelter? Because not all campgrounds actually have shelters. Some of them are tenting only campsites. A rarity, but they're great when they're there, is the tent platform. I prefer, if I'm going to pitch the tent, I'm going to pitch on a tent platform if it's available. It's like being able to pitch your tent on a floor. Everything stays much cleaner, much more convenient. Once I learned to do it, and I had another video on pitching a tent on a platform, I just find that to be more convenient. Does it have tent sites? Because sometimes the organized campgrounds are actually shelter-only campgrounds and don't have a tent site, so it's important to know that. Does it have bear facilities? In other words, a bear box or a bear pole or a bear cable. I've never seen a bear cable, but I have seen bear poles. Here's a picture of a bear box at a campground in the Shenandoah National Park. Also shown here happens to be something that's not a tent platform. It's actually called a tent pad. It just gives you at least with a pad, it's a flat surface. I actually don't like them too much. I'll use them if I have to. A lot of times their surface is not a nice dirt surface. A lot of times it's like a gravelly surface, and sometimes it doesn't work out. This particular one worked out pretty well for us, and you can see the bear box off to the side. The question of whether there's water. Not all campsites have water, just like not all of them have privies. Most have privies, most have water. Sometimes, though, the water supply is dried up, or rarely, on occasion, there is actually a campsite that just plain doesn't have a water supply. And I only came across that once. I mean, I've come across a few where the water supply had dried up, but at least there was an attempt to have a water supply there. And then finally, most importantly, is if you're in the deep south, it's good to know that there's Union soldiers around who can protect you from the rebels. So then once you're at a camp, the question comes up, are you going to use a shelter, or you're going to use your tent or hammock? I'm going to just speak mostly of tents because that's what I use now. So I have a priority list. I will take a shelter if I'm the only person at the camp. The problem, of course, is if I've arrived at a camp and it's a couple hours before sunset, I have no idea whether I'm going to be the only person in that shelter. As a matter of fact, it's very likely people will start to arrive later in the day. So I will still take a shelter if there's just me, or if it's raining, I'll take a shelter when there's maybe two or three, well, one other person or two other people in there. What I'll do is, if I'm the first one there and I'm not sure whether I'm going to stay in a shelter or not, I'll at least kind of stake out claim to a wall of the shelter, at least provisionally. The advantage of sleeping against a wall, either the left or the right of the shelter, is that you can put your sleeping bag and sleeping pad down, and then your equipment's kind of between you and the wall. It just stops it from getting mixed with the other hikers. Typically, the first hiker will take one wall. The second hiker to arrive takes the other wall, and then all the other hikers who arrive, they take the ones in between. And especially with the cooties pandemic, I'm probably going to wander out of the shelter if too many hikers start to show up who intend to use the shelter. Now, there is a rule, from what I understand, in the Smokies, Smoky Mountain National Park, that if there's a spot in the shelter, you must take it. I don't know with the pandemic if they've backed off on that at all temporarily, but I think the idea is they want to minimize the impact on the environment and minimize bear problems. So you take the shelter if it's available. If you're stuck with a rule like that, well, then I guess just follow the rule. If it's raining, I will prefer to take a shelter if it's not crowded. If I've decided that I'm going to go with a tent, well, then a tent platform is my first choice. Tent pad maybe would be my second choice. Tent at a regular campground is certainly preferred to stealth camping. Though stealth camping is really not bad. I mean, this list is prioritized, but even the bottom thing on the list is pretty nice. I actually like the stealth camp, especially if there's a water supply. It's not so fun if there is no water supply, but you kind of prepare for that as you're getting near the end of the day and you're going to be camping. If you suspect you're going to be without water, then you grab water along the way. And really, as I'll get to in a few minutes, I like to have 2 gallons of water. Seriously, if I'm going into a dry camp, I want to have 2 gallons of water, and I'll explain why. So once I've decided to set up, if it's in a shelter, it's just a matter of unpacking my stuff, and like I said, keeping against the wall. Usually the shelters have hooks and everything else to put things on, and I can usually hang my clothes and that sort of thing. But if I'm going to set up my tent, just find the best tent site that I can, the flattest. If there is a slight slope to it, well, so be it. Sometimes you don't have a choice, but I kind of arrange it so that I'm going to be sleeping with my head on the upslope. Michael Conti told me a long time ago, never sleep with your head below your feet. You'll just wake up with a headache. After I've got my tent set up and my stuff inside the tent, especially if it's raining or something like that. Well, if it's raining, I'm not going to put up a clothesline, but if it isn't raining, I'm going to put up my clothesline, and I'll get to what goes on the clothesline in a moment. If it's not raining, it's a nice day out, I'll probably hang my sleeping bag over the clothesline just to air it out a little, because it's been deep in my backpack all day and squished up, and I want it to fluff out. So I have an unpacking routine. And this may seem a little silly, but it's actually not. I actually have a stuff sack routine. And in my stuff sack routine, as I unpack the things that are going to need to be unpacked, I follow this logical mechanism for putting my stuff sacks together so I never forget one. First, my pillow stuff sack goes into my sleeping pad stuff sack. Sleeping pad and the pillow both come out. My sleeping pad stuff sack with the sleeping pillow stuff sack, and it goes inside the sleeping bag stuff sack, and then the idea is they're kind of related hierarchically, I guess. And then that whole thing goes into my tent. The sleeping bag's inside the tent as I'm unpacking things. If I don't happen to have it out on the clothesline, then it's unpacked in the tent, and everything's kind of airing out as best they can. And all that stuff sack with everything in it goes into the tent stuff sack, as does the tent stake stuff sack. The clothesline goes into the tent stake stuff sack also. That's what I got it out of. Once I've hung it up, I have the empty stuff sack. Other items, knowing where stuff is important. I always put my first aid kit and my hygiene kit kind of at the foot of the tent. No particular reason other than if I always do it the same way every time, I'm not going to have trouble finding things, especially at night in the dark. My headlamp goes into my mesh pocket that's inside the tent. Um, I'll have a water bottle hanging, a water platypus hanging up. If it is raining, I have to make some other adjustments, but just by doing things the same way every time, my food bag goes at the foot until it's time to hang it out or whatever I'm going to have to do with the food bag. And I start recharging my devices. I have battery packs in one particular colored bag. Remember, I had the series on the colors of my stuff sack. So I start recharging devices just so that they're up and charged in the morning. Usually the Garmin tracker is only down 10-15%. The phone may be down 50% depending on how many pictures I've been taking or how many videos I've been taking or texts I've been taking it out of airplane mode and looking for texts and that sort of thing. So that's the setting up of the tent. Now, if it's not in a tent, I do the things which are applicable in the shelter. So when it comes to clothing, after I've got everything set up, I'm going to change into my camp clothes. And the idea there is, let's assume it's not raining. I'm going to hang up all my clothes that I've been wearing all day and sweating all over. And since I do carry 2 sets of clothes, like I said in the video about setting up a stealth camp, I will hang up all my clothes if the other set has been used already. Take every opportunity to continue to air it out until its next laundering. If I haven't broken into the second set yet, then fine, I leave it in the clothes bag. But I do hang out all the used clothing. If it's raining, you still got to air out your socks and your underwear. My tent sets up with tent poles, and I know this sounds kind of gross, but I'll snake my socks through the cloth handle on the tent pole, which is outside the enclosed part of the tent, but in the vestibule, so it's covered from rain. And that way I can air out my socks and air out my underwear if it's even if it's raining. Unfortunately, my regular clothes, I just have to kind of roll them up and put them in my used clothes bag, with the hopes that the next day, if it's not raining, I'll have a chance to air them out a little more. Keeping the boots dry is important, so they stay. I don't bring them into the tent. I don't want to get dirt all over my tent, but I do keep the boots inside the vestibule where they're nice and covered and aren't going to get rained on. If they ever do get wet on the inside and you stop at a hostel or whatever, or somebody's got some, somehow you get some newspaper. I know it's rare that you would have it with you on the trail unless you were needing it as tinder to start fires. Stuff some newspaper or dry paper inside the boots, and that actually absorbs a lot of the water. Just a trick taught to me by actually a Marine out on the trail. So that's what I do for the clothing. I do have camp shoes I put on. I want to get my socks off. I do have sleeping socks, but those don't go on until my feet have had a chance to air out. I want to get, they've been enclosed in the boots all day, hiking 15 to 20 miles. I want to get my feet aired out fresh. If I can, I'll soak them in a stream, just to a little bit of cleanup there. So cooking, must have a warm full meal at night. There are times when I haven't done it and the next day was just miserable for me. So I get the water boiling as soon as possible, unless I'm really early to camp and I'm not going to eat right away or don't want to eat right away. Don't get fooled by that. Don't want to eat though. You may feel you don't want to eat and you really ought to. So I get the water boiling as soon as possible, which takes a while because I do use the Esbit stove. If I had a jet boil, it'd probably be less of a problem, and I may be experimenting with jet boils in the future. But get the water going, because the water is what you're going to need to cook and to clean up. And the nice thing is, the water boiling and even the cooking, which is usually just filling a some kind of packaged food, sort of rehydrating in hot water. You kind of set it up and then you set it to the side while you do other things. I do use over 6 liters of water in camp. Well, I'll explain here. 2 liters for drinking and cooking. Probably about 1 liter almost for cleaning up, and that's cleaning up my cooking items like the bottom of the pot for the water, especially since I use the SBIT, and there's that chemical residue on it. 3 liters to start the next day and for drinking overnight. But I really want to leave camp with 3 liters. So if I'm in a camp that has no water supply, this is why I want to bring in, if I can, bring in nearly 2 gallons into the camp, just so I'll have a little bit extra. You know, if I haven't had to carry it too far, and I knew the camp I was going to was dry, I picked up water, you know, a mile or 2 before I got to the camp. Having plenty of water, I'd just rather have too much water than not enough, because I can always dump some of the water. But it's nice to be in a camp with a water supply. I would rather take actually a stealth camp with a water supply than a formal camp that doesn't have a water supply. And again, like I said, because of the chemical residue, if I've got an SBIT, cleaning up my pots and pans is very important. And then cleaning up me physically. I bring all sorts of hygiene stuff with me, and, you know, keeping the hands clean, you know, and maybe applying some of the Perel sort of thing, Germix sort of thing, just to, you know, on your hands, underarms, a few other places, just to, you know, to try some bit of decency out on the trail. Okay, so last topic really is sleeping. Basically my tent routine after it's time to hit the sack. This may seem kind of trivial, but I have zippered doors, and they have double zippers, you know, rainbow sort of situation. And I always keep the door zipper at the top. It's arbitrary, but in the dark, I always know where to find that door zipper. Even if I can't see, I can feel my way around, and I don't have to fuddle around and say, oh, did I put it down here today? Did I put it down there today? No, it's at the top. It's going to be at the top of the arc, you know, and I can feel the tent pole like through the mesh, so I'll always know where that is, so I can always easily open it. I also keep my camp shoes right outside that, in the vestibule, right outside the door that I'm likely to be using to get out in. My headlamp, like I said, is always in a mesh pocket. My water bladder, I know where that is. I either have the water bladder hanging or I have a bottle nearby. Another thing I do, by the way, is as soon as I set up my tent, I unroll the sleeping bag to get it fluffed out. Like I said, I may hang it on the clothesline if it's not raining, but if it is raining, it goes right in there, gets opened up and fluffed up. And at night, when it's possible, if it's not too cold, I do keep, and it's not raining too hard, I do keep one of the tent flaps open, at least one, just to get some air across. Now, it is warmer in the tent. If it starts to get cold, I can close that tent flap, but couple times I've actually woken up a little claustrophobic, and I don't know if it was the CO2 content, you know, carbon dioxide content inside the tent, but you know, that was just something I do just to keep the air. In this tent, they even advertise it as, you know, hey, you can always leave a couple tent flaps open. Actually, I do one on each side if I can, just to get a nice cross breeze. Like I said, if it starts to get cold or it's raining too hard, I will, you know, swap over to closing the flaps. Now, the next thing that would normally happen is breaking camp. That is actually my least favorite activity. Setting up camp and have at the end of a day and having a nice camp routine is my favorite part. So that's going to be a separate video on what I go through to break camp. So that's basically my camp routine in a nutshell. Just by having these habits to follow, it just makes the experience so much easier. Though some of the things seem arbitrary and rote, at least I'm not losing things. I told that story about how I did lose my clothesline on my first night out on the trail because I hadn't really had an established routine yet. And like I said, this routine is for sleeping in the tent. It's not much different for sleeping in the shelter, but you do go through a few different things, and sleeping in the rain is slightly different than when it's not raining, but that's it. So we'll see you next time.